The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not represent or reflect the official policy or position of the Take a Paycheck Foundation and podcast. All information shared is from personal experiences and does not constitute medical advice. We do not take responsibility for any statements expressed during the podcast. Take a Paycheck does not endorse any products or services. Any said products or services mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you or your condition. Please consult with your physician if you have medical questions, as it may pertain to your condition.
Hi everyone, welcome back to this week's episode on Take a Paycheck. I'm so excited to have Jillian joining me today. Hi Jillian, can you give me a brief introduction about yourself? Tell me a little bit about your education, your hobbies, and what you've been up to recently.
My name is Jillian Wickert. I live in Edmonton, Alberta, where I am attending the U of A, doing a master's in community engagement. My kind of hope with that in the future is to become a community engagement specialist. And some of my hobbies include board games and playing tabletop RPGs, so stuff like D&D.
Thanks for sharing. And you're on this podcast because you are diagnosed with a rheumatic disease. What is your condition and when were you diagnosed?
So my official diagnosis is juvenile idiopathic arthritis, and I was diagnosed when I was 3 years old.
Okay, so you kind of lived life with this diagnosis and you don't really know life without it.
Yes, my earliest memory and very first memory is just having arthritis, and I've never known anything other than having JIA.
And so, how did your parents tell you and when did they tell you? Because I don't think they told you at that young of an age. So, yeah, when did your parents tell you that you had JIA?
That's interesting because I don't know if I ever really officially got told necessarily that this is what this is. It just kind of came through the circumstances of what I was going to rheumatologist appointments. I was being told about all of these medications that I was on. I was being told about why my joints were swelling and everything. And then from a young age, I just had all of this knowledge about JIA. So I could just easily tell people about it, whether or not I officially understood that this was a diagnosis that I had and other people didn't have a similar diagnosis. And then by the time I started kindergarten or anything, everyone else kind of knew too who needed to know. So I never remember officially having my parents be sit me down and be like, Jill, this is what's going on. Just, this is your official diagnosis. And this is what this means. I think that it didn't really become really an issue of me not realizing what this diagnosis means until after I graduated even. It wasn't until I was in university and interacting with people who didn't automatically know what my diagnosis was. And suddenly I was like, oh yeah, this is something that I need to explain to people and I have a responsibility for. So it was just kind of an interesting switch once I graduated and moved out of being like, oh, okay, yeah, this is this is something that isn't normal and other people don't automatically know about.
So how did you go about explaining it? Because you've had it for so long and you've entered different stages of your life where you've met new people through elementary school, high school, university, grad school. How have those interactions changed over time?
So when I was a kid, I think that those interactions were very brief and straightforward. Again, a lot of people in my class just automatically knew, so I didn't really have to explain it to people. And if I did, it was so natural to me that it was just yeah, I'm Jill, I have JIA, and this is what it is. And just telling people an absurd amount that they just didn't need to know about this condition and what it means. Got into high school, met very few, like every once in a while we had a new person move in. I'm also from like a very, very small town. So I graduated in a class of 20, and 10 of those people were people I went to kindergarten with. So it was very rare for me to have to introduce someone else to it. What that turned into when I graduated for my first year, I just did service industry jobs. So whenever I met someone, it was hard to try to figure out how to explain it to someone who didn't have my entire history. So what it became was me kind of waiting for at least a few months, and then it naturally came up. I had a rheumatology appointment. I had a flare up. I had to take my medication or something. And if they were a close enough friend, they would be present during something like that happening. And then I would kind of explain a little bit. And if they had follow up, I would let them follow up with it. And then once I got into university, that kind of continued in my undergrad. I didn't explain it unless someone became a good friend or really needed to know for some reason. And now my grad studies has been so interesting because my thesis is connected to my JIA. So I just find myself talking about it more than ever before with people who I wouldn't normally introduce it to. And this is a bunch of scholars too. So they have 30,000 follow-up questions of like what that means and like when I got it. And it's just been a roller coaster of learning what type of questions people will be asking and how best to try to answer that.
In university itself now, I definitely tell less people. Like if they're very close to me and I find a necessity to tell them, then I will. But I find myself not really telling that many people. But because I do have a podcast and it's easily accessible on social media, if you Google my name, it's all there. If that's how you discover it, it's okay. But I wouldn't like go out of my way to be like, hey, I have arthritis. I just find there's no need. Whereas in at least elementary school, I feel like everyone knew for some reason. I don't know why they had to know, but everyone knew because my class was very small. And I found that if I would go to like gym class, we would only be with the same people like all the time. And I went to private school when I was diagnosed. And so we had 3 different, I guess, cohorts of classes and we were all in the same area. So I found myself being the only one that needed extra help, needed a scribe, needed accommodations in our class in general. So I just felt like everyone knew there was a problem with me, whether they knew it was arthritis or not. They kind of made their assumptions, but I just find myself now not really telling that many people. And I find that I really resonate with what you were saying because I don't think you need to tell everyone. I think people feel like they might need to because how would they like navigate life? But I think as you grow older and you live with the disease more, you find yourself not really sharing if you don't need to.
And I don't think that not sharing comes from a place, at least for me, of like shame with it or like feeling like weird about telling someone. It's just that it's like there are hundreds of things that people need to know about me in a general interaction that before they would ever need to know something like I have arthritis. And yeah, it's something that I reserve for sure to the people who I deem as like, yeah, you're my close friend. Therefore, you to some degree need to know so that you can help me, right?
I find myself telling people that I have arthritis if there was like a situation or a reason or something that they need to know so they could be aware of it or help me or accommodate me. Like there's like no other reason why I would just be like, hey, I'm Natasha, I have arthritis. Like, no, that's not really happening. And it's not because of like guilt or shame. It's just that you're right. There are other things that you can tell that may be even more important than that in just like a general interaction with someone. But we didn't really, so we skipped into kind of like talking about your interaction with people and like how you told people you had arthritis. But I'm just wondering, like, how did you even get to see a healthcare professional? I know you were not old enough, but like if your parents probably like told you any stories, if they did, how did they kind of go to a doctor and be like, hey, Jillian needs some medical attention?
Yeah, so when I was diagnosed initially, what had happened was I got chicken pox, and through getting chicken pox, I got, of course, sick. And then the chicken pox went away, and for some reason, I was still sick, and all of my joints were swelling. I went from a child who was physically walking around to suddenly not being able to walk, and my dad having to carry me around. So my parents had that happen and went, something is wrong, right? So we went to the GP, our general practitioner, in the city closest to where I grew up. And he like took a look at me, and as far as I understand, at that time was like, I think this is a rheumatic disease potentially. I'm going to send you to a rheumatologist. So like it was within the year of me getting symptoms that I went to the GP, and then I got sent to the Calgary Children's Hospital, which was about a 2.5 hour drive from the town that I grew up in, and met my first rheumatologist, and just immediately was like, yep, you have JIA, and we're going to start treating it. So I feel very lucky, especially from a lot of other episodes of your podcast that I've watched, of like how quickly I really did get diagnosed.
I think I feel the same way because I hear so many people's story and I just like tend to be very grateful of my situation because people do definitely have it worse. It gives me an opportunity to like learn from their story to then talk to other young people who may be facing that and have something to say to them or connect them with those people. But yeah, for sure, I've seen a variety of different people from different backgrounds living with different types of conditions, and their experiences are sometimes very similar but all super different. For sure. You seem to have a very like quick, easy diagnosis journey. How did the medication journey end up being for you?
Medication was a nightmare from the beginning. I had a lot of struggles with going in and out of medications. So when I was initially diagnosed, my rheumatologist put me on Plaquenil and naproxen that just never fully kept everything under control. So I have permanent scarring and damage to certain joints just because they never really stayed inactive. I then got put on methotrexate when I was, I think, in elementary school. And then when I was late elementary, I started finally getting put on biologics, got taken off of methotrexate because it wasn't making me feel well, was just on biologics for a little bit, got put back on methotrexate, got taken off of methotrexate, got put back on Plaquenil, got taken off of Plaquenil. They decided at one point that Enbrel, my one biologic, was working so well that what if they put me on a new biologic? I got put on Humira after Enbrel, and Humira did not do the same stuff that Enbrel did. And so I was having flare-ups suddenly again by the time I was hitting high school. I moved out after high school, stopped taking any medication because I just decided I didn't want to anymore. Got into a number of arguments with my rheumatologist, got put back on Humira, got put back on methotrexate, and then finally got put on Actemra, and that's been keeping everything under control finally.
I thought my medication journey was bad and like crazy, but now I listen to yours and you're like, got off of this, got onto that, I think mine was also not great either because I think it was 3 to 4 years. I did not have anything that worked, which I think a lot of people also face, but some people just find the medication that works for them really quickly and then they get into remission. But for me, it took me like 3 years. So I was really just doing the same thing as in, but a little bit different. So it was like naproxen, prednisone, methotrexate, and like Humira, and then Actemra. And then I had 10 joint injections which like you shouldn't be doing, but it was like to a point where I could not even like function in school and I had damage in my joints and I just needed something because nothing was working. And it was, I think, too long for me to like be diagnosed with this condition and not have a medication that worked. So I had these like 10 joint injections, something happened, I got better, and then I've been on the same medication ever since. It's been the triple therapy, methotrexate, plaquenil, sulfasalazine for 4 years now. And yeah, I think now I've been sort of stable. It's just crazy to me how much like trial and error goes into it. I think researchers and physicians are definitely working hard to like find solutions that this doesn't happen in the future. But I think as patients, we just hope it comes quicker.
Especially like the biologics too, right? Like the fact that I even got to be on biologics when I like relatively early on in life, I feel very lucky for the number of biologics that are out now too. Like I remember there being 2 biologics that you could be on when I initially got put on them. And now there's so many. There's an insane number. But there still is that little bit of frustration, like you said, of like the trial and error and the jumping through hoops that I've kind of had to deal with of like, you're not allowed to move on to the next biologic until you prove that you can't, like that this biologic isn't helping you, right? And it had to be like a checklist of like, it's not doing this, it's not doing this. And then I got moved, and then it was like, okay, now we need to prove that this biologic is helping you. So we need to make sure that you're doing this, and we need to make sure you're doing this, and we need to make sure you're doing this so that you can stay on it and stay insured on it. And it was like, why can't I just try medicines and see if they work?
No one knows that this stuff is going to happen. I remember when I was feeling all these medications, like I was like filling all the kid medicines, and then my rheumatologist was like, okay, well, we really need to show that you failed all of them, and then we need to like apply or do some paperwork so that you get an adult medicine dosage or whatever. And it's just the whole concept of this is crazy to me.
Yeah, exactly. Like why is it so much proving? And I get it that it's like they're expensive medications. That's what it got explained to as for me, was how expensive they were was a big deal. And that's why or the Canadian government is like so careful about testing and seeing and like you proving that something isn't working or something, right? But it's just like, you want me to feel better, I want to feel better. What exactly is this doing by restricting this medication? So it was always just like a bit of an annoyance to me, right?
As we grow up and learn to live with our condition, I think we also have more experiences, and then we realize medication is not the only thing that you need. You need more things, pain management tools and like skills. So I'm wondering, like, over the years, if you have ever kind of put pain management skills and tools into your daily life in order for you to succeed in what you're doing and manage like day-to-day activities and tasks.
Yeah, so I remember, of course, one of the early things that we all get pushed into was physiotherapy. So I had to, after driving for 2 hours and then doing an hour-long appointment with my rheumatologist, I would often go down into the basement of the children's hospital and do my physiotherapy sessions with the women that were down there. And I just remember hating physiotherapy. I would just get told, do this stretch, do this stretch, do this stretch. I got put in a splint really early on Both of my elbows are affected by arthritis, but one is worse than the other. So I got put on in a splint, and I had to wear a splint every night when I was sleeping, and it was so uncomfortable. So I very quickly just started, like, at an absurdly young age. My parents would be like, "Okay, Jill, do your stretches," and I'd be like, "No," and they're like, "What do you mean, no?" But I would just refuse to do stretches. So my parents had to figure out different ways or different things that could potentially help me. I did chiropractor for a really long time when I was quite young, actually, and that really helped. And then I got into junior high, like late junior high, and then throughout high school, I just found out that yoga was like the best thing that I could be doing for my joints. So I got really, really into yoga and riding like stationary bikes and stuff just to keep up kind of my general health, and realized how important that was. Like I said, moved out, everything fell apart. I was in a flare up for 4 years straight of my own doing because I was refusing to do anything. And then when I started to kind of try to get everything back together, one of the things that got suggested to me was acupuncture. And I had fought the idea of ever doing any of the kind of Eastern medicine kind of ideas because I just didn't think that they were proper medicine. Went to an acupuncture appointment with a flare up in both of my hands. Every single one of my finger joints was swollen, and she did her acupuncturist thing. And within 2 hours after my appointment, all of my joints were fine again. Like they were, all of my fingers were not swollen anymore. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the best. So right now I've continued to do acupuncture. I've gotten back into doing yoga and riding the bike and doing a couple of other exercises that I know I can handle, which is always something that you need to be careful about, of finding that thing that you can actually handle exercise wise. And I watch my diet a little bit. I kind of figured out that sugar has a tendency to cause flare-ups for me. And milk, unfortunately, just gives me a stomach ache. So I kind of restrict those two things a little bit. I don't know if this is promotional, but it helped a lot. I did a course out of Australia, and it was just this online little course about reframe the pain. And it's just talking you through how to reframe your pain, how to make it so that you don't automatically go into those high stress situations where your body is automatically going to become painful. And so I did that course and found a lot of techniques through that course of like how to stop myself from getting into those mindsets where I'm just going to cause myself pain.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think everyone has different experiences. Like for me, I tried acupuncture. I had the worst hand ever.
My affected joints are all of my fingers, both of my wrists, both of my elbows, both of my knees, both of my ankles. So she does that in a lot of different areas, kind of trying to promote circulation and health in all of my different joints. But she'll put them like in my fingers, kind of right here. I get a lot in my stomach. I get them kind of all up and down my leg. I get an insane number of needles. I always get one right here for anxiety point 2. I'm just a cushion by the time she's finished.
Oh, that's crazy. I would never be able to do that. But I got it in my, I think, wrists and fingers, and my hand became so puffy and red, and I had a really bad allergic reaction. So never again did I ever go there, and I never tried it again because I think for me, I tried so many things. Like I did try like acupuncture, chiropractor, naturopathic medicine, homeopathic medicine, and I feel like after trying everything, I went back to square one of Western medicine, which like you should do. Because there was also no medicine that was working for me, they were like, okay, let's explore all these other things. And that opened another can of worms because it's like, okay, these are the things that are not working, so let's try this and this. Other people have said this. I literally went to India to try Ayurvedic medicine in grade 9. Did that work? No. But my parents were still like desperate to the point where we really wanted answers. And so we tried everything. They literally spent thousands of dollars, like even on magnetic resonance therapy or something. I don't know what it's called, but I used to sit beside a machine for like 3 hours and just sit there. And the lady told me that some magnetic rays were doing something. We believed all this, like we believed all these things. At the end, I decided to just change my lifestyle, like what I eat, and find foods I should probably avoid. But I think it's so personalized for everyone. It's just really interesting that I went through all of that. And we're back to, okay, take your methotrexate, Plaquenil, sulfasalazine, which has been helping me, and then modify what you eat or do some exercise, maybe meditation or yoga, physiotherapy. It's just general things.
Yeah. No, and I agree with that. Like I would never try to be on acupuncture just as my only thing right now, right? Actemra is for sure a huge part of that, and exercise is a huge part of that. And then this acupuncture is just kind of helping with my general health too, and it gives me an hour a week as a busy student where I just get to lay on a bed and fall asleep, which is super nice. But what was the one treatment you said that you had in India again?
Ayurvedic medicine.
So what's that?
They have certain centers in India. When you're in India and you come to Canada, you can't maintain anything you do there. The lifestyle is so different, but there's centers dedicated for healing therapies and different things. And it's worked for lots of people. Not work for me. I wouldn't say that I recommend it or anything, but yeah, they give you herbal medicine. They have a specific diet that you follow. People actually stay there. So it's like kind of like a resort. They feed you, make sure your health is okay. You check in with a doctor, they give massage, and they've had lots of centers in different places. But I think it's really important that you also tell your doctor what you're gonna do. I found myself really just because my doctor was like, she's like, okay, like if this is what you want to do, if you want to go to India, try Ayurvedic medicine, go ahead. But whatever medicine you're on, you like have to tell me because sometimes they will interact with your regular medicine. So I think it's really important to be like transparent if you are going to try something that your doctor's like aware about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like everyone needs to be in the know of what's going on and what supplements you're on and what medications you're on. Like you can't hide that stuff. That becomes dangerous.
You said you lived in like a small town. So how do people in your town or around you react to your arthritis diagnosis?
Yeah. It's so it's fun to, I guess, kind of reflect on that sometimes for the fact that, like I kind of mentioned, everyone in my small town just knew about my arthritis from the time that I was quite young. So through my parents, through the school, through me just being very open about it and always wanting to tell people about it, I was never particularly secretive about it. And in fact, probably told more people than I ever needed to as a child. So my town, my friends, my entire school knew about the arthritis. And everyone just interacted with me very, very normally. I never had an issue growing up with anyone who was from my town being mean to me about my arthritis, bullying me about my arthritis in any way. They were very, very supportive. Everyone kind of knew that I had or needed a certain level of extra help, and it was never really an issue. People would take my bag if I like obviously was having a flare up in my hand. They would take my stuff if I was obviously struggling. They would tell me to sit down if I was limping. Like it was just a very nice, supportive thing, to the degree that I like kind of took advantage of it too. Like growing up, I got the like accommodation with the teachers that on really, really cold days, I didn't have to go out for recess because the cold affects your joints, and I found that it made me stiff. But it turned into me just being like, it's too cold out. I don't want to go outside for recess, so I'm going to tell them that I'm having a flare up so that I don't have to go outside for recess. Or me telling my phys ed teacher that I was having a flare up so that I didn't have to do PE that day, just because I just like didn't want to get pelted playing dodgeball today. It just doesn't sound like the day for me to need to do that. So a lot of support from my town and family and friends that I continue to get, and a little bit of me being mischievous about it.
Because whenever I've like had to avoid gym class, it's because I literally could not move. But do I like gym class in general? No. So I'm happy to sit somewhere else and do something else. But when I did not go to gym class, I had to do like yoga exercises on the side, which was very embarrassing. It was very isolating, whereas I've heard like other people on my podcast tell me they were excused from gym class. It's interesting to see across the different like provinces and territories and also countries what like getting out of gym class means for each person when they have this diagnosis. Wanted to talk to you a little bit about psychological barriers. Have you ever like, experienced some psychological barriers before? How have you grown past them when it comes to like living with a rheumatic disease?
Yeah, so I, for a very long time, would have never said that I had any psychological barriers connected to my arthritis in any way. I did have anxiety from like high school onward kind of thing, that got quite a bit worse when I started university, which didn't seem uncommon. I had a lot of friends who had quite severe anxiety in university. It's an anxiety provoking place to be. And I did initial counseling and kind of was working through a lot of test anxiety, a lot of general school anxiety, a lot of like stuff with friends, stuff with exes kind of stuff, and went, great. I think this is what the anxiety was connected to, and I'm good now. And then what had happened was COVID hit, and I had a full like panic attack breakdown when COVID hit, because I kept on hearing on the news all of that information being like, if you have any sort of a chronic illness, you are going to be severely affected by COVID. If you get COVID, it's more likely to severely affect you. And I basically had like doctors being like, you need to be really careful. Like you're one of the people who is really susceptible to COVID. You need to be careful. So I started to become convinced that I was going to just get sick, and I was going to get really, really badly sick when COVID happened, and was having breakdowns because of it, and like to a degree that other people weren't. And I was like, what is going on? So again, my mom, ever the patient sage, standing over me and being like, Kate, you need to go do this, told me that I had to go talk to a counselor again. And so I found a counselor, and I went in and was talking to him, and just through one of the conversations, I don't even know how fully it came up, but it became apparent that my arthritis had really affected my anxiety. A lot of my anxious thoughts were actually connected to being diagnosed with JIA at such a young age. So I had a lot of connections that I didn't realize I did of I need to keep myself safe because I have JIA, so everything is more dangerous for me and I'm more likely to get sick and I need to protect myself and I need to protect myself. And so my anxiety was getting exacerbated by this idea of I'm going to die and I need to do everything in my power to protect myself. And so I worked through a lot of that with my counselor. I worked through a lot of issues that I didn't realize I had with my rheumatologists over, 23 years of seeing a rheumatologist. I had to work through a lot of issues that I had developed with those appointments. I worked through a lot of issues that I had developed with like the medical world in general that I didn't even realize were problems. And just had to reframe a lot of stuff about my arthritis and my understanding of myself, and now can luckily work my way out of that anxiety, even just because I understand where it's centered better now.
So let's talk a little bit about your initiatives and your interests. You did mention that you're doing a thesis project in grad school and it does deal with the experiences of people with JIA. So can you talk a little bit about your thesis project and why you decided to focus your thesis on this? I'm assuming it is because of your own experiences. If you can give me a little bit more of an explanation about that, that'd be great.
My project did come directly from my own experiences and understanding of life with JIA. I, for a very long time, didn't want to ever connect myself to a project about chronic illness. I just had kind of convinced myself that that would be an important thing for myself. But then during my undergrad, I went into a sociology major, slowly started getting to read more research involving chronic illness, disability, and mental health, and just kind of fell in love with that field of interest, and really went into it trying to find out more. And as I continued with my undergrad, I realized that I do kind of have an opinion on a lot of this, which shouldn't have been a surprise, but for some reason was for me, that it was like, oh, I have my 2 cents to give to this, actually. So I went into my grad studies with the very broad topic of chronic illness as kind of my field of interest. And I had a very specific thesis that I was going to do. But it just kept on becoming my supervisor asking questions and being like, but why is this important to you? And what exactly are you trying to get at with your research? And it developed into me being like, okay, yeah, my research needs to be based off of my understanding of my experience with JIA. It can't be about like this broad chronic illness thing right now, because it's about this specific gap that I see in how treatment of JIA is happening right now. So I ended up creating the project of it's titled, How Are You Doing Really Identifying Neutral Experiences of People with Juvenile Idiopathic Arthritis?
And so why did you pick neutral experiences?
For sure, it has been interesting trying to explain why exactly it's neutral. And part of the issue was that there kind of wasn't a term already out there for what I'm trying to research. What I found in a lot of current research on chronic illness and disability is that it's centered on a lot of people when they're like kind of initially diagnosed, and they're working through the adaptations and the accommodations and all of this stuff that you need to figure out, and like reframing your life world. Or it's kind of these people who have been diagnosed for a very, very long time, talking about their exclusion in society and their struggles with having a disability in society. And I never want to say that those aren't extremely important topics, but I just saw a gap in that of this idea where you could get to a point where you don't really have a good or a bad experience necessarily. You're kind of somewhere in the middle. So I chose neutral as this term of, I wouldn't describe my experience personally as good or bad. It just kind of is what it is in a very central way.
And how do you plan on like using this research in the future?
My hope would be that this research in the future would encourage rheumatologists to potentially think about arthritis and the experiences with arthritis in a different way, so that there's not this feeling of if you're doing bad, that's the only time that you would really need certain treatments. Like someone who's in a neutral place might also need certain treatments and certain help. It just would look different than someone who's in a bad experience, right? Or a good experience. I also am kind of hoping that it will help with like patient advocacy groups and stuff to, again, give them kind of a sense of what this community might need, what these people with these neutral experiences need to fill this gap in how they interact and feel a part of the community of people with rheumatic diseases.
So I wanted to end off the episode with an advice segment. What would you say to those who are interested in participating in your research? I guess this is like a plug if you want.
Great. Thank you so much. Anyone who thinks that they might identify with a neutral experience, it doesn't have to be based off of anything that I said. If you are watching this and you go, I also have a neutral experience, please feel free to reach out to me at jwickert, so JWICKERT at ualberta.ca. It doesn't need to immediately be like, yeah, you're going to be part of the study. It can just be us having that initial conversation of if you think you're eligible and what you kind of want to talk about, or you just asking me questions about it. I'm open to answering questions. The participants for the study, so the inclusion criteria for the study is that people live in Canada, speak English, are 16 to 30 years old, have an official diagnosis of JIA, have been diagnosed for 5 or more years, and have active JIA or are in medicated remission.
Thank you so much, Jillian, for joining me on today's podcast episode. We started off by discussing your experience with JIA, your medication journey, what you've been on, how it affects you, how you told people around you what it was like living with arthritis, and also that you do live with it. We talked about kind of other alternative treatments that you've tried alongside medication. So massage therapy, acupuncture, talked about my experience too. We also talked about the psychological barriers when it comes to living with a rheumatic disease and how you've kind of identified them, and also discussed your thesis. So everyone, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see everyone in 2 weeks on Take a Pain Check. Thank you so much. Bye.